I was fixing my old bike in the middle of a quiet afternoon when she said it. If I were 10 years younger, I wouldn't just ask for a ride. I'd ask to never come back. I looked up, and that was the first time I saw her eyes. Not the color, but the weight. The kind of eyes that had forgotten how to be seen. What started as a harmless neighborly moment turned into something I never expected. A secret. A connection. A choice I still think about to this day. You can't imagine what happened next. Welcome to Vows and Betrayals, where we share the stories that live in the quiet between right and wrong. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, leave a dot in the comments. You're not alone. To our returning listeners, thank you. And to those joining us for the first time, we're glad you're here. Don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's begin. I was 22 when I moved into the old house at the edge of town. Not because I chose it, but because it was all I had. My parents gifted it to me on my 18th birthday, and not because they were generous. They just didn't want to deal with it anymore. The porch sagged like it had given up. The paint peeled like old sunburn. Every floorboard creaked under even the softest step, and the yard had become a sanctuary for weeds and forgotten tools. But it was mine. And that meant something. I spent 2 years fixing it up, paycheck by paycheck, working side gigs, painting fences, mowing lawns, scrubbing tiles. I dropped out of college when tuition broke me. I picked up a wrench, a paintbrush, and eventually, peace. Not happiness, but peace. That day, the sun was hot, beating down on the concrete like it was trying to prove a point. I was crouched in the driveway, trying to fix my bike chain for the third time that week. My hands were greasy sweat, dripped from my brow, and the metal groaned in protest. I didn't hear her footsteps, only her voice. If I were 10 years younger, I wouldn't just ask for a ride. I'd ask to never come back. I looked up. She stood at the edge of my lawn, sunlight hitting the curve of her shoulders, her hair loose and a little windblown. She wore a white blouse tucked into a skirt that danced just below her knees. Nothing fancy. But there was grace in the way she stood. Calm, controlled. Her smile wasn't wide. It was knowing. Like she had seen 1,000 versions of this moment and still found it worth showing up for. I blinked, my hand still holding the chain, like I forgot what it was for. "You all right there?" she asked, one brow lifted. "Yeah," I stammered. "Just chains being difficult." She nodded, lips curving slightly. "Aren't we all?" Then she turned and walked away. I watched her disappear around the corner before I even thought to ask her name. And that right there was the moment everything in my world quietly began to shift. She didn't show up again for the next few days. Not that I expected her to. Still, I found myself glancing toward the corner of the street every time I was outside, just in case. I kept myself busy. There was always something to do. The hallway wall needed patching. The bathroom faucet still leaked. The front steps groaned like old bones when I walked over them. But even as I hammered and painted and wiped sweat from my brow, I caught myself listening for footsteps. Then one morning, just after I had cleaned myself up and was about to head out for supplies, there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was. This time in light denim, a pale yellow cardigan and sunglasses perched on top of her head, like a crown she forgot she was wearing. In her hands was a small paper box tied with twine. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Not at all." "I brought you something," she said, holding up the box. "Donuts. From the bakery, a few blocks away. Thought you might need a sugar break. I stepped aside to let her in. You read my mind. The inside of my house still looked like it belonged to a construction zone. Tools stacked in corners, wires half hidden behind new drywall, the smell of paint lingering in the air. But the kitchen table was clean. 2 chairs, 1 chipped mug, a half-finished bowl of cereal. She didn't seem to mind. We sat, shared the donuts. She drank coffee I brewed too strong. We talked. She told me her name was Marla. She lived 4 houses down in the blue house with a bird bath in the front yard. She had lived there nearly 20 years. Married, I asked before I could stop myself. She didn't blink. Yes. Still am. A pause. But we're more like roommates now. He travels a lot. Even when he's home, it's like we're on opposite sides of the glass. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She smiled softly. It's all right. Some things lose their color over time. It doesn't always mean they were never beautiful. And something about the way she said it gently, like brushing dust off an old photo, made the room feel smaller. Like we were the only 2 people awake in a world that had stopped moving. Marla didn't stay long that day, just enough for 2 donuts, 1 cup of coffee, and a few quiet smiles. But after that, she began to pass by more often. Sometimes she waved from across the street. Other times, she slowed down to ask about whatever project I was working on that week. And then one Saturday morning, she stopped at the edge of my lawn with that same half smile. Got a minute, she asked. Sure. I've got a leaky kitchen faucet that's been driving me mad. I tried fixing it myself, but, well, I'm clearly not cut out for plumbing. I grabbed my toolbox without hesitation. Her house was warm, lived in. Family photos on the wall, a faint scent of vanilla and old wood in the air. The kind of place that told stories just by existing. I crouched under the sink while she leaned on the counter behind me, arms crossed. You know, she said slowly, when I first got married, I imagined dinners with candles, soft music, laughter in the kitchen, the little things. I glanced up at her wrench in hand. What happened? She shrugged. Work happened. Children happened. Distance happened. Now we eat in silence. I clean up alone. I tightened the valve under the sink heart a little heavier than before. When I stood, she was closer than I expected. Not too close, but enough to notice the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the soft rise and fall of her breath. She held out a towel so I could wipe my hands. Thank you, she said. You didn't have to. I looked at her and smiled. You asked. That's enough reason. She held my gaze for a second too long, then turned to test the faucet. It no longer dripped. A tiny victory. That's better, she said softly. Maybe some things can be fixed after all. And maybe she meant the faucet. Or maybe she didn't. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Maybe some things can be fixed after all. I found myself pacing the living room, glancing toward the window every few minutes. I didn't expect to see her. I didn't need to. But something about the way she said it, the way she looked at me when she handed me that towel, lingered like a half-finished song. A week passed. Then 2. We didn't speak. Not because we were avoiding each other. Life simply got in the way. But then, on a quiet Friday evening, there was a soft knock at my door. She stood there, holding 2 takeaway containers. I ordered too much Thai food. Hope you're hungry. We ate on the porch, sitting on mismatched chairs under the amber glow of the porch light. The town was quiet. Cicadas sang in the distance. The air smelled like warm grass and something deeper I couldn't name. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me she used to love poetry, used to write it, even before the world asked her to be practical. I told her I'd never had Thai food before. She laughed and said I'd been missing out. Then came the question I didn't expect. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? I didn't answer right away, just looked at her. The way the shadows fell across her face, the tired wisdom in her eyes. Sometimes I said. She nodded slowly, like she knew that already. My husband was my first everything she said, voice softer now. But it's like we built a house together and then lived in separate rooms. I don't remember the last time he looked at me like I was someone. The wind picked up gently. A leaf rolled across the porch. And now she added, I meet someone who sees me in a way I forgot I could be seen. We didn't touch. We didn't move. But the space between us crackled like static. If I had reached for her hand, I don't know what would have happened. But I didn't. And maybe that was the right thing. Or maybe it wasn't. A few nights later, rain tapped against my windows like it was trying to be invited in. I was reading, or pretending to, when I heard a knock. This time, softer, hesitant. When I opened the door, Marla stood there, drenched to the bone arms, crossed over her chest, like armor that wasn't holding. I shouldn't be here, she said. I stepped aside anyway. She walked in, slowly dripping water across the wood floor. I handed her a towel. She didn't speak for a while, just stood there in the dim light, towel clutched in her hands like a lifeline. I was sitting in my car for 30 minutes, she whispered, in front of my house. I just couldn't go inside. I nodded. I didn't say it, but I understood. We sat on the couch. She tucked her legs underneath her wet hair sticking to her neck. I made tea, even though she barely touched it. We didn't talk much, but silence for once didn't feel like emptiness. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower. Do you think it's possible, she asked, to feel more yourself with a stranger than with the man you married? I looked at her, not as someone who needed fixing, but as someone who finally allowed herself to break. I think I said carefully, sometimes strangers see parts of us we stopped showing to people who stopped looking. She exhaled slowly, then leaned against me. Not a kiss, not a firestorm, just a head resting gently on my shoulder, a kind of surrender. Her fingers brushed mine barely there. We stayed like that for a long time, long enough for the storm to soften, long enough for her breath to slow. And in that quiet, I noticed something strange. The wedding ring was gone. After that night, something shifted. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. There was no kiss, no promises, no declarations, but there was a quiet understanding, a soft thread that now pulled us closer, even in silence. She began stopping by more often, sometimes with leftover soup, sometimes with a book she thought I'd like, sometimes with nothing at all, just herself. We never spoke about her husband, not once, but each time she sat on my porch, kicked off her shoes, and curled her feet under her. On the swing, I felt the space between us narrowing. We cooked together once something simple, pasta and garlic bread. She laughed when I burned the first batch of toast. I loved the sound of it, not because it was loud, but because it was real. That night, after dinner, she handed me a small envelope. I found this, she said. It was buried under some old clothes. I must have written it years ago. I opened it. It was a letter addressed to her husband. But it wasn't love. It was grief. A farewell she'd written but never sent. Lines scratched out, rewritten, then scratched out again. At the bottom, I miss who I was before we forgot each other. I looked up. She wasn't crying. She looked lighter. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I just wanted you to know I wasn't always this woman. There was a time I danced barefoot, in the rain, fell asleep in bookstores, and believed in impossible love. I folded the letter carefully and gave it back to her. You still are, I said. That woman. She's still there. She smiled, half grateful, half skeptical. I want to believe that she whispered. I do. We didn't sleep together. Not that night. Not any night. But what we shared was more than touch. It was that rare, quiet kind of connection. The one that doesn't ask to be explained. The one that makes you feel like maybe you're not as invisible as you thought. As the weeks passed, something else began to grow. Not louder, but heavier. We never labeled what we had. We didn't dare. But in the quiet moments, when her hand brushed mine, when our knees bumped under the table, when she lingered on my porch a little too long, we both knew this couldn't last. Not like this. One afternoon, I walked past her house and noticed the curtains drawn shut. No wind chimes, no humming from the kitchen window, just silence. That evening, she came over with a small paper bag. Inside was a book, worn edges, dog-eared pages. It was my favorite, she said. I want you to have it. I looked at her. Are you leaving? She nodded once. A weekend trip. Portland. My sons want to see me. I think I need to go. I understood, even if my chest didn't. We sat on the porch again. No dinner, no wine. Just the creak of the swing and the weight of things unsaid. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. I know. I don't regret it. But I think I need to remember who I am when I'm not with you. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Promise me something, she added, turning toward me. Don't remember me as the woman who stepped outside her marriage. Remember me as someone who was drowning and found air. I nodded, throat tight. She reached over and placed her hand on my chest, right over my heart. This, she said, was real, and I believed her. She left before sunset. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering hug, just a soft closing of the door, and the kind of silence that settles when something sacred has ended without being broken. She never came back, not in the way I secretly hoped she would. I saw her from time to time, walking her dog, tending to her garden, waving politely from across the street. We were neighbors again, nothing more. And yet everything I touched in my home still echoed with her fingerprints. The book she gave me stayed by my bedside. The garlic bread recipe she taught me became a Sunday ritual. The silence she left behind taught me how to listen. I thought I'd be angry, that I'd feel used or left behind. But what I felt most was gratitude, because she reminded me of something I didn't know I'd forgotten, that connection doesn't always have to last forever to matter. Some chapters exist to shake you, to remind you that you're still capable of feeling, of seeing, of being seen. And when those chapters end, you don't slam the book shut. You mark the page. You breathe. And you carry it with you, not as regret, but as proof you lived. So if you've ever felt like you were fading in your own life, like the person you used to be is slipping through your fingers, I hope you remember this. It's never too late to feel alive again. It's never too late to be witnessed, to be wanted. And even the quietest moments can echo for a lifetime. And if this story touched something deep inside you, a forgotten part, a quiet ache, a memory you thought had faded, don't keep it to yourself. Stories like this aren't just about love. They're about being seen even when the world looks away. So if you've ever whispered a goodbye no one else heard, or carried a beautiful secret that never had a name, leave a comment, say nothing, or say everything. This is a place where your silence is understood and your voice welcomed. If you found comfort here, consider subscribing to Vows and Betrayals. There are more stories, waiting stories that speak gently but stay with you long after. Thank you for listening. Until the next one, take care of your heart